The tower key was colder than it should have been. Nora Bennett told herself it was because it had hung for years on the iron hook outside Steward Crane's office, untouched by warm hands and ignored by everyone sensible enough not to ask what waited behind the northern stair. It wasn't. Cold had a simple honesty to it. This was something else, a thin, watchful chill that seemed to recognize the bones in her fingers before she had even closed her hand around the brass. Careful with that, one of the younger maids whispered behind her, though not softly enough to be kind. Silent omegas disappear in places like that. Someone laughed. Nora did not turn. She had learned a long time ago that silence could be mistaken for weakness, obedience, stupidity, or guilt, depending on what other people needed from it. In Ashford Keep, people rarely waited to learn which one was true. They saw the pale-haired Omega who spoke so rarely that some servants believed she had no voice at all, the girl who kept eyes lowered, cleaned hearthstones, folded linens, carried pitchers, and moved through corridors like a shadow that had been given an apron. They did not see the things she noticed. The scrape of expensive boots outside locked rooms after midnight. The smell of burned paper beneath lavender oil. The way councilmen stopped speaking when she entered, then began again, because servants were furniture, and silent omegas were less than that. This morning, she had been sent to clean the Alpha King's tower as punishment for spilling wine near the council table, though Nora knew the spill had not been an accident in the way they claimed. Vanessa Cross had shifted her silver sleeve at the exact moment Nora passed, and the goblet had tipped, red wine spreading over the white map of Northern Territories like a warning no one wanted to read. Steward Silas Crane had not asked what happened. He had only smiled that thin, polished smile and placed the tower key in her palm. Since your hands are so restless, Miss Bennett, you may put them to use where no one important will be disturbed. Now Nora stood at the foot of the northern tower with a wooden bucket in one hand, a bundle of rags under her arm, and the key pressed so tightly into her palm that its teeth left small half-moons in her skin. Above her, the tower rose from the oldest side of Ashford Keep, black stone against a pale morning sky, narrow windows sealed with iron bars and old dust. No banners hung from it. No guards stood before it. That frightened her more than either would have. Forbidden places were usually watched. Forgotten places were usually meant to stay forgotten. Behind her, the great hall carried the breakfast sounds of a royal household pretending nothing was wrong, plates being set down, boots crossing polished stone, firewood cracking in hearths large enough to warm a chapel. Then the sound changed. Not stopped. Changed. Conversations lowered at once. A chair scraped and went still. Even the flames in the wall sconces seemed to shrink toward their wicks. Nora knew who had entered before anyone said his name. Alpha King Rowan Ashford did not need announcement. The air announced him first. He passed through the corridor in a dark coat buttoned high at the throat, his broad shoulders cutting through the morning traffic, as if the keep had been built around the expectation of his arrival. Men who commanded armies stepped aside for him. Women with noble blood lowered their eyes. Nora lowered hers too, not from fear exactly, but from habit, and habit was sometimes harder to break than fear. He was nearly past her when he stopped. Only for a second. Not long enough for anyone else to understand it as attention, but long enough for Nora to feel the weight of it settle over the key, the bucket, her reddened fingers, her quiet face. She expected him to ask why she was there. She expected him to tell Steward Crane that a servant had no place near the tower. Instead, his voice crossed the stone between them, low and even. Give her gloves. No one moved at first. Then a guard obeyed, pulling a pair of work gloves from his belt and placing them beside Nora's bucket. Rowan did not soften his expression. He did not smile. His gaze flicked once toward the key in her hand, and something unreadable passed through his gray eyes, gone so quickly she wondered if she had invented it. Then he continued down the hall, and the household breathed again. Nora stared at the gloves. Kindness would have been easier to understand if it had looked like kindness. This felt more like warning. She put them on anyway, lifted the bucket, and climbed the first stair into the tower where the cold was waiting for her like it already knew her name. Nora had climbed the northern stair only 3 times in her life, and never passed the 3rd landing. Servants used the lower rooms for winter storage when the keep ran out of space, but even that had stopped years ago, after a footman claimed he heard a woman humming behind a locked wall and refused to carry blankets up there again. People at Ashford Keep liked stories like that. They liked haunted towers, cursed rooms, dead queens, and nameless girls who should have known better than to touch old doors. What they did not like was a living Omega who noticed too much. Nora moved slowly, not because the bucket was heavy, though it was, but because every step told her something. Dust lay thick along the center of the stone stairs, untouched for months, maybe longer, yet the left edge near the wall showed a narrow path, where someone had walked often enough to disturb it. Not a servant carrying supplies. No scuff marks from rough shoes. No spilled ash, no wax drops, no loose thread from laundry sacks. These were careful steps, expensive steps, made by someone who did not want the tower remembered, but still needed something inside it. Nora paused on the 2nd landing and listened. Below, the keep continued without her. A bell rang for breakfast. A kitchen door swung open and closed. Somewhere in the lower hall, one maid repeated the morning scandal in a bright whisper, saying Nora Bennett had finally been sent where her silence belonged. Nora could almost see the shape of their faces as they said it, pity on some, pleasure on others, relief on most. A silent Omega made everyone feel safer about their own place in the world. If there was someone lower, someone quieter, someone easier to dismiss, then perhaps they were not so close to the floor themselves. She had understood that by the time she was 14 years old and newly brought into service, after her mother died in a fever that took 3 families from the western cottages in 1 week. Back then, Nora had still tried to answer when people asked questions. Her voice had never carried well. It came out soft, sometimes uneven, as if every word had to travel through deep water before reaching her mouth. The other girls called it strange. The housekeeper called it inconvenient. Steward Crane called it evidence of a weak wolf, though he said it with the satisfaction of a man placing a label on a jar and deciding the jar would never surprise him. So Nora learned to save her words. She learned that people filled silence quickly, and what they filled it with was often more useful than anything they meant to say. A guard complaining near the laundry room might reveal which council chamber was being prepared. A noblewoman laughing over tea might reveal whose marriage was failing. A steward burning letters might reveal which name he feared enough to remove from paper. Nora knew that the east pantry lock stuck in wet weather, that Lord Pellman smelled faintly of clove oil whenever he lied, that Vanessa Cross practiced her lunar smile in reflective windows before entering rooms, and that Alpha King Rowan did not pass through the servant corridors unless he wanted to avoid being seen by the council. None of this gave Nora power in any official sense. Her name appeared on no ledger except the wage book. She had no family crest, no formal claim, no seat in any hall where decisions were made over hot coffee and sealed documents. But knowledge had weight. It gathered quietly, like snow on a roof, until one day the beams either held or broke. On the 4th landing, the air changed again. The chill sharpened, carrying scents the lower tower had kept hidden, old lavender, cold ash, iron dust, and beneath them all a dry sweetness like flowers pressed between pages and forgotten for years. Nora set down the bucket, and flexed her fingers inside the gloves Rowan had ordered for her. They were too large. The leather creased over her knuckles and swallowed the tips of her fingers, yet they were warmer than anything she owned. That made her uneasy. Cruelty had rules at Ashford Keep. Indifference had rules. Unexpected protection did not. She reached the 5th landing and found the first door standing slightly open. No one had told her where to begin. That was part of the punishment. Let the silent Omega choose wrong, let her damage something old, let Steward Crane have a reason to do more than smile. Nora understood the trap as clearly as she understood the disturbed dust along the stair. She did not touch the door at first. She crouched, studied the floor, and saw a faint line where it had opened recently, cutting through the grey powder in a clean arc. Someone had been here within days. Maybe hours. Her throat tightened, not with fear, but with the familiar pressure of words she already knew no one would believe. Slowly, carefully, Nora pushed the door wider with the handle of the mop. The room beyond waited in greenish morning light, and every covered piece of furniture seemed to be holding its breath. The room had once been a sitting chamber, though no one had sat there in a very long time. Nora knew that from the way the chairs had been covered, not hurriedly, but with care, each sheet tucked beneath carved wooden legs, as if the person who left expected to return before the dust had time to settle. The windows were narrow and tall, their iron bars throwing thin shadows across the floor. Morning light came through them in pale stripes, touching the furniture without warming it. Nora stood just inside the doorway, and let her eyes adjust before she moved. That was another habit people mistook for hesitation. Servants who rushed broke things. Servants who noticed survived. A small fireplace sat against the far wall, swept clean except for one crescent of grey ash tucked near the back stone. On the mantel, 3 objects remained uncovered: a tarnished silver clock that had stopped at 2:17, a white porcelain bowl with a crack shaped like a branch, and a dried bundle of lavender tied with ribbons so faded it had almost become the color of bone. Nora looked at the lavender longer than she meant to. Her mother had tied herbs that way, tight at the stems, loose at the flowers, because she said plants needed room. To remember the sun. The thought arrived so suddenly that Nora had to press her gloved fingers against the bucket handle until the feeling passed. This was not a place for memory. This was a place where memory had been locked up, because someone powerful had been afraid of it. She crossed to the nearest chair and lifted the sheet slowly. Dust slid off in a soft grey breath. The chair beneath was upholstered in blue velvet, expensive once, worn thin along the arms by hands that had rested there often. Beside it sat a small table with a drawer. Nora did not open it. Not yet. Instead, she looked at the floor around it and saw what she had expected to see once she understood the pattern on the stair. The dust had been disturbed in front of the table. Someone had knelt there recently. Not stood. Knelt. The mark was faint, 2 pressed places where knees had bent into old powder, and between them a clean spot shaped like the corner of a box. Nora's pulse moved carefully through her chest, each beat controlled and separate. She reached for the drawer with 2 fingers, then stopped as footsteps sounded below. Not many. 1 set. Heavy, measured, unhurried. The tower seemed to recognize them before Nora did. The cold pulled back from the walls. The air steadied. Even the sheet in her hand stopped trembling. She turned toward the doorway just as Alpha King Rowan Ashford appeared at the landing outside the chamber, not breathing hard from the climb, not surprised to find her there, and not wearing the public face he had carried through the hall. Here, in the forgotten half-light, he looked less like a king carved into duty and more like a man who had come somewhere he had promised himself not to enter. Nora lowered her eyes at once, but not before she saw his gaze move over the room, the covered chairs, the lavender, the clock, the floor beside the table, her hand near the drawer. His expression did not change, yet something in the silence did. It tightened, like a rope drawn slowly through a closed fist. "Who opened this door?" he asked. The question was quiet. That made it worse. Nora swallowed. Her voice, when it came, was as small as it had always been, but the room carried it clearly. It was already open, Your Majesty. He looked at her then, truly looked, and the attention landed with such force that she almost stepped back. Men looked at Nora all the time without seeing her. Rowan Ashford looked as if seeing was a choice, and he had just made it. No, he said. It was not. There was no accusation in the words, only certainty. Nora felt the shape of the trap beneath them both. If he believed she had opened a sealed room, she would be blamed. If he knew she had not, then someone else had been here, and that was worse. Rowan stepped inside, and the scent of pine, rain, and cold stone crossed the older scent of lavender. He stopped near the mantel, but did not touch anything. His eyes rested on the clock fixed forever at 2:17. For one brief moment, the king looked younger than he was, or perhaps only more tired than people were allowed to notice. You should not have been sent here, he said. Nora almost answered that she knew. Instead, she looked down at the two large gloves he had given her and saw a thin smear of silver dust across the right thumb, though she had touched nothing silver except the key. In the drawer beside her, something clicked once, soft and deliberate, as if it had been waiting for Rowan's voice to wake it. The sound was so small that it should have belonged to the old wood settling in its frame, but Nora knew the difference between a room making noise and an object answering. She looked at the drawer. Rowan looked at her. Neither of them moved at first, and in that held second the tower seemed to lean closer, stone by stone, listening to what they would decide. Step away from it, Rowan said. His voice was controlled, but not cold. Nora obeyed, because obedience was the safest shape her body knew how to take, though she kept her eyes on the narrow brass handle. Rowan crossed the distance himself and crouched before the table. It was strange to see the Alpha King lower himself in a servant's dust, stranger still to see how careful he was. He did not yank the drawer open. He touched the wood with 2 fingers, as if the little table was not furniture but a sleeping thing that might remember pain. The drawer did not open for him. The brass handle stayed still beneath his hand. A faint line of tension appeared at the edge of his jaw. He tried once more, slowly. Nothing. Then Nora felt the key in her pocket turn warm. Not hot enough to burn, not sharp enough to frighten, just warm enough to become impossible to ignore. She pressed one gloved hand against the skirt of her work dress and wished, uselessly, that the tower would stop noticing her. Rowan's gaze dropped to the motion. The key, he said. Nora took it out. The old brass had changed in the light. What had looked dull and brown at the foot of the stairs now held a thin silver glow along the teeth, like moonlight caught in scratches. Rowan stood. For the first time since he entered the room, something like surprise moved across his face, not enough for most people to name, but Nora had spent her life reading what others tried to hide. Where did Crane get that? He asked. Nora's throat tightened around the answer. From the hook outside his office. Rowan's eyes sharpened. There has been no key to this chamber for 20 years. The words went through the room like a draft beneath a closed door. Nora looked at the table, then at the stopped clock, then at the lavender ribbon that had faded almost white. 20 years was longer than she had been alive. 20 years was long enough for a lie to grow roots beneath a castle and call itself history. Rowan held out his hand, not demanding, only waiting. Nora placed the key on his palm. The silver glow vanished. It became ordinary brass again, cold and plain and stubborn. Rowan stared at it for one quiet moment, then gave it back to her. You do it, he said. Nora wanted to tell him she should not. She wanted to say that silent omegas were punished for less than opening royal drawers in sealed rooms with kings watching. But his face held no mockery, and beneath her fear was another feeling, smaller but steadier, the feeling she had when she found a stain no one else could remove or heard a false note in a nobleman's polite speech. The feeling of knowing a thing was waiting for the right hand. She slid the key toward the drawer. There was no lock she could see, yet the brass teeth found a hidden place beneath the handle, and the drawer opened with a soft sigh. Inside lay no jewels, no gold, no weapon, nothing that looked worthy of the fear wrapped around this tower. There was only a square of folded linen, a dried white flower, and a strip of paper browned at the edges. Rowan did not reach for them. Nora understood, without knowing how, that he could not. She removed the linen first. Dust clung to it in a fine grey skin. Beneath it, stitched in silver thread, was a mark she had seen only once before, carved above the throne in the great hall, but partly covered by banners. A crescent moon resting beneath a small crown. Rowan's breath changed. Not louder. Not weaker. Just changed. Nora unfolded the paper with both hands. The ink had faded, but one line remained clear, written in a woman's careful script. If they erase my daughter, let the tower remember her. Nora read it once. Then again. Behind them, from somewhere higher in the tower, came the faint sound of a door unlocking by itself. The unlocked door was not close. Nora knew that by the way the sound traveled down through the hollow spine of the tower, thin at first, then widening as it touched each landing. It came from above them, past the rooms no servant had ever been allowed to clean, past the narrow windows where snow sometimes gathered on the inside ledges in winter, past the place where old stories said Queen Alara had stopped receiving visitors. Rowan looked toward the ceiling, and for a moment the weight of his title seemed to settle harder across his shoulders. He was not afraid. Nora did not think men like him were taught how to be afraid in ways other people could recognize. But something in him had gone very still. The paper trembled once in Nora's hand. She folded it carefully, because care was the only language she trusted when her heart began moving too quickly. Daughter. The word did not belong to her. It belonged to portraits in royal corridors, to baptismal records sealed with wax, to women who wore silk before breakfast and had names carved into chapel stone. It did not belong to a maid with cracked fingertips and a voice people forgot to wait for. Still, the tower had opened for her. The key had warmed for her. The drawer had answered her hand and not the king's. Rowan turned back to her. Did Crane know you had this assignment? Nora almost said yes, then stopped. Steward Crane had not simply known. He had arranged it with too much pleasure, placed the key in her hand too easily, watched her fingers close around it as if he had been waiting to see whether something would happen. The memory brought with it another small detail, one she had been too unsettled to name before. When the key touched her palm, Crane's smile had faltered. Only for an instant. Not guilt. Recognition. He wanted me to come here, she said softly. Rowan heard her this time, without asking her to repeat herself. That unsettled her more than if he had not. Then we are already late, he said. They climbed without the bucket, without the rags, without the pretense that anyone still cared about dust. The stairs narrowed after the sixth landing until Rowan had to turn his shoulders slightly to pass. Nora followed one step behind him, the folded linen and paper tucked carefully inside the front pocket of her apron. The tower grew less abandoned as they rose. Not cleaner, exactly, but more awake. The air held the dry scent of old paper and sealed cedar. The walls changed too. At first they were plain black stone, then faint carvings began to appear beneath the dust, moons, crowns, small running wolves, branches heavy with leaves. Someone had tried to scrape them away years ago, but had not finished. Or had not been able to. On the eighth landing, they found the open door. It was small, almost hidden behind a hanging tapestry so faded that its pattern had become a blur of grey and blue. Rowan reached for it, then stopped before touching the fabric. "This was my mother's private archive," he said. His voice did not break. It did something quieter. Nora slipped past him before she could lose courage, and lifted the tapestry with both hands. The room behind it was round, no larger than a small bedroom, with shelves built into every wall from floor to ceiling. Most were empty. Some held boxes tied with pale ribbon. In the center stood a covered portrait facing away from the door. Beneath it, on a low table, rested a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon beneath a crown. Nora did not move toward it. She did not need to. The moment she saw it, warmth opened beneath her ribs, deep and unfamiliar, like a sleeping animal lifting its head after years of silence. Her wolf, the one everyone said was weak, answered without sound. Rowan inhaled sharply beside her. "That pendant was buried with my mother," he said. Nora looked at the silver curve, at the crown no bigger than her thumbnail, at the way the metal glowed as if moonlight had been poured into it. Then the portrait behind it shifted in its frame, turned slowly toward them though no hand touched it, and Nora saw the painted face of a pale woman with soft eyes, silver blonde hair, and the same small birthmark beneath the left eye that Nora had hidden all her life under lowered lashes and careful silence. Nora lifted one hand without meaning to and touched the small place beneath her left eye. The birthmark had always been faint, a pale crescent no larger than a grain of rice, easy to hide under lowered lashes and easier to pretend was nothing. Her mother had once kissed that spot and called it a little moon. After her mother died, Mrs. Vale in the laundry had told Nora not to let the other girls see it too clearly, because strange marks on Omega children made people ask questions that never led anywhere kind. Nora had obeyed. Obedience was simple. Questions were not. Rowan stared at the portrait as if the painted woman had reached through 20 years and placed a hand against his chest. "My mother never sat for this," he said quietly. "Not after I was born." Nora looked from the portrait to him. "Then who painted it?" He did not answer at once. His eyes moved to the pendant on the table, then to the empty shelves, then to the boxes tied with ribbon. He was arranging facts inside himself, Nora realized, the way she arranged linens by size and wear and usefulness, except his facts had names attached to them and grief, and a kingdom that had been taught to remember only what certain men. Aloud. "Someone who saw her after the court was told she was too ill to leave her rooms," he said. The words were calm, but the calm had edges. Nora stepped closer to the low table. The pendant brightened before she touched it, a soft silver pulse that filled the room without casting shadows. Rowan watched it with an expression Nora could not place. Wonder, perhaps, but guarded. He looked like a man standing before a door he had wanted open for most of his life, only to fear what might be waiting on the other side. Nora removed one glove. The air touched her bare fingers, cold enough to make them ache. When she picked up the pendant, the warmth beneath her ribs spread outward, gentle and certain. It did not feel like power. It felt like being recognized by something older than language. The crescent crown opened on a hidden hinge, and inside was not a jewel, but a circle of folded paper so thin it seemed made from onion skin. Nora unfolded it with breath held tight in her throat. The writing matched the note from the drawer. "My son will inherit the throne, but my daughter carries the first blood. If she lives, the line lives whole. If they erase her, the crown will weaken until truth is restored." Rowan went very still beside her. Nora did not fully understand the words, but she understood the way they changed the air. She also understood the sound that followed, faint and far below them, voices rising through the tower's old speaking vent, the kind used in large houses before electric bells had been installed. Steward Crane's voice came first, smooth with irritation. "The king is not in council." Vanessa Cross answered, lower than Nora had ever heard her speak. "Then find him before the ceremony. If he enters that tower before the records are gone, every arrangement we made becomes unstable." Nora's fingers closed around the pendant. Rowan moved to the wall where the vent was hidden behind carved branches. Neither of them spoke. A third voice, older and male, said, "The archive should have been cleared years ago." Crane replied, "It was sealed. Only the marked blood could wake it. I sent the girl to test the key, not to invite the king into the room with her." The girl. Nora had been called many things in Ashford Keep, most of them small enough to fit under a door and disappear. But this time the words did not make her shrink. They made something inside her sit upright. Vanessa's voice sharpened. "Then remove her from the tower. Quietly. Before the lunar presentation begins." There was no threat shouted, no dramatic cruelty, only the neat, practical tone of people discussing an inconvenience before breakfast. That made it colder. Rowan turned from the wall. His face had changed. Not into anger that filled the room. Into decision. "They know," Nora whispered. He heard her. He always seemed to hear her hear. "They know enough to be afraid," he said. Nora looked down at the pendant in her palm, at the old paper trembling against her skin, at the painted queen with Nora's hidden mark beneath one eye. For the first time in years, her wolf did not feel silent because it was weak. It felt silent because it had been waiting. Rowan crossed to the shelves with the quiet speed of a man who had learned not to waste motion. Nora followed the silver tug of the pendant toward the lowest row, where 3 cedar boxes sat behind a veil of dust so smooth it looked untouched, until she saw the thin clean line around their edges. Someone had tried to move them and failed. The ribbons were not tied in bows, but in old royal knots, the kind used on legal records before the council began stamping everything with red wax and heavy signatures. Nora knelt, and the floor was cold enough to reach through her dress in seconds. The pendant warmed in her palm. The first knot loosened by itself. Rowan stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the stillness of him, but he did not reach around her, did not take the box, did not claim the discovery simply because he was king. That mattered more than Nora wanted it to. Inside the first box lay baptismal pages, midwife notes, and a narrow book bound in grey leather. The name on the first page was Rowan Michael Ashford, born before dawn during a spring storm, witnessed by Queen Alara, Royal Midwife Jean Bell, and Council Steward Silas Crane. Nora looked up. "He signed this." Rowan's eyes lowered to the name. "He was already serving my father then." Nora turned the page. The next record had been cut out so neatly that the missing space looked almost intentional, but the page beneath it carried the pressure marks of old writing. She tilted the book toward the window. The ghost of the words appeared in shallow dents. "Female child. First blood mark. Removed from succession for protection." Nora felt her stomach tighten. Not with shock exactly. Shock was loud. This was quieter, a door inside her opening onto a room she had always been standing beside without knowing it. "There is more," Rowan said. His voice was low, but not distant. Nora opened the second box. It held letters tied by month, all addressed to Mara Bell, Royal Archivist and Healer. Mara Bell was still alive. Nora knew her as the old woman who tended herb shelves behind the infirmary and scolded kitchen boys for wasting mint. She had never imagined the woman had once held royal secrets in her hands. One letter slipped loose from the bundle and fell against Nora's knee. She picked it up. "If the girl is found, do not bring her to court until the king can hear truth without council ears around him. Let her be plain. Let her be quiet. Let the world overlook her if that is what keeps her alive. Nora read the last sentence twice, because the words had reached into the center of her life and rearranged it. Let her be quiet. All this time, silence had felt like something missing from her. Now it looked, impossibly, like something someone had chosen to protect. Rowan turned away, one hand resting on the back of a covered chair. His knuckles whitened, but his voice remained steady. My mother did not abandon anyone. Nora could not answer. The room had begun to blur at the edges, not from tears exactly, but from too much meaning arriving at once. She had been an orphan, then a servant, then a silent omega, each name smaller than the one before it. Now an old queen's hand had reached through paper, and called that smallness a disguise. The third box opened with no knot at all. Inside was a family tree drawn in silver ink. Rowan's branch descended from the crown line. Beside it, hidden beneath a flap of parchment, another branch curved outward under the crescent mark, not above Rowan, not beneath him, but beside him. First Blood Keeper, the label read. Guardian line to restore and witness the crown when the royal blood is fractured. Nora breathed carefully. She was not the missing princess from a child's story. She was not a bride pulled from ashes by magic. She was something stranger and heavier, proof that the kingdom's history had been split in two, and her life had been used as the hiding place. Footsteps sounded below, many this time, climbing fast, but still orderly, the polished rhythm of guards following official orders. Rowan looked toward the door. Nora folded the family tree, and placed it against her heart beneath her apron. Her fingers no longer shook. They are coming, she said. Rowan turned back to her, and for the first time since the tower opened, he looked not at the mark under her eye, not at the pendant, not at the papers, but only at her face. Then we do not run, he said. Nora listened to the footsteps rising through the stone and understood, with a calm that frightened her less than it should have, that her silence was about to become the loudest thing in Ashford Keep. The first guard reached the archive door with one hand raised to knock and froze when he saw Rowan standing inside. Behind him, 3 more men halted so quickly that their polished boots struck the stone in a staggered rhythm. Steward Crane appeared last, not breathless, not disordered, not even surprised in the obvious way. That was how Nora knew he had expected trouble, only not this kind. His gaze moved from Rowan to the open boxes, then to Nora's apron pocket, where the folded papers rested against her heart. For 1 second, his expression emptied. Then he put his face back together with the careful skill of a man closing a ledger before anyone could read the numbers. Your Majesty, he said, bowing just low enough. The council has been waiting. The lunar presentation cannot proceed while you are absent. Rowan did not answer him at first. He picked up the silver pendant from the table and held it where the morning light could touch it. The glow returned at once, soft but unmistakable, filling the small room with the color of moonlit snow. The guards stared despite themselves. Crane did not. Crane looked at Nora. Miss Bennet appears to have handled royal property without permission. There it was. Not panic, not accusation shouted in anger, but something cleaner and more useful to him, procedure. Nora had seen that kind of cruelty all her life. It wore pressed sleeves. It used proper names. It made harm sound like paperwork. Rowan closed his fingers around the pendant, and the light dimmed. She was assigned here by your order. To clean, Your Majesty. Not to search sealed records. Crane's voice softened on the last words, as if he regretted having to say them in front of witnesses. A servant girl may misunderstand the seriousness of old objects. Especially one so accustomed to silence that she cannot properly explain herself. Nora felt the sentence land in the room and become what it was meant to be, a cage. The guards looked away from her, uncomfortable now. Not because they believed Crane fully, but because believing him would be easier. A silent Omega had opened a royal archive. A steward had merely reminded everyone of rank. The world preferred the second story. Rowan turned his head slightly toward her. He did not speak for her. That was the strange mercy of it. He waited. Nora's throat tightened, but not enough to close. She removed the family tree from her apron and held it with both hands, careful not to crush the old paper. This was hidden behind the first record, she said. Her voice was quiet, and the stone room carried it anyway. Crane smiled. A charming claim. The pendant opened before I touched the boxes. Objects do not give testimony. No, Nora said, looking at him now. But signatures do. The smile thinned. Rowan's eyes moved to the paper. Nora unfolded the baptismal page, and turned it so the names faced the room. Your name is on the first record, Steward Crane. You witnessed the king's birth. You also witnessed the missing page that was cut out after it. No one moved. The silence changed shape. Crane looked at Rowan then, and whatever he saw in the Alpha King's face made him choose a different road. This is not a conversation for a dusty tower, he said. The council will hear it properly. Properly meant surrounded. Properly meant controlled. Properly meant Nora standing below men, who had practiced disbelief for years. Rowan understood it too. Then the council will hear it now, he said. They descended together, not as captor and accused, though the guards formed a line behind them as if trying to remember which version of events would be safest later. Nora carried the papers. Rowan carried the pendant. Crane walked 2 steps ahead, already arranging his expression for an audience. By the time they reached the Great Hall, the lunar presentation had been paused but not dismissed. Vanessa Cross stood near the raised platform, in a silver gown that caught every candle flame and returned it brighter. Council elders occupied the long table. Servants lined the back wall, pretending not to stare. Nora saw Mrs. Vale from the laundry, 2 kitchen boys, the maid who had laughed at the tower key, and old Mara Bell standing near the infirmary arch with one hand pressed to her mouth. Crane lifted his voice before Rowan could speak. Your Majesty, honored council, I regret to report that a servant was found in possession of restricted royal materials. Every eye turned to Nora. Her work dress was grey with dust. Her hair had slipped from its pins. Rowan's gloves hung too large on her hands. The hall saw exactly what Crane wanted it to see. Nora lowered her eyes for one breath, not in surrender, but to remember the girl she had been that morning, standing at the foot of the tower with a bucket and a key too cold to be natural. Then she raised her head. That is not all he found, she said. The hall did not become silent all at once. It changed in layers. First the servants stopped shifting against the back wall. Then the council elders stopped whispering behind their folded hands. Last, the nobles near the platform turned from Vanessa Cross toward Nora, as if noticing for the first time that the dusty girl in the middle of the room was not lowering her head. Steward Crane gave a small laugh, almost kind in its shape. Miss Bennet is overwhelmed. Mourning in a restricted tower would unsettle anyone of her station. Nora felt the old instinct rise in her, the wish to make herself smaller so the room would move on and forget her. But the papers in her hands were real. The pendant in Rowan's hand was real. The birthmark beneath her eye, the one she had spent years hiding beneath lowered lashes, was real. She touched it once, lightly, and saw old Mara Bell close her eyes near the arch as if a prayer had finally found its way home. Rowan stepped beside Nora, not in front of her. The difference traveled through the hall faster than any order. He held out the pendant to the council table. "Open it," he said. The eldest councilman frowned. "Your Majesty, perhaps this should be done in private." No one word, even, quiet, immovable. It was hidden in private. It will be answered in public. He placed the pendant on the polished table. Its silver surface went dull the moment his fingers left it. The councilman touched the crescent. Nothing happened. Another elder tried, then another. Vanessa Cross approached, when Crane gave her a sharp look that was almost invisible unless one had spent years watching powerful people speak, without moving their mouths. She lifted the pendant with careful fingers. The silver stayed dark. Her face, usually perfect in every social angle, flickered with confusion. "It is an old trinket," Crane said. "A symbol, nothing more." Rowan turned to him. "Then you will not mind opening it." Crane's smile remained, but the skin around it tightened. "I have no royal blood." "You have a witness signature on a record that no longer exists," Rowan said. "That gives you enough connection for truth." No one laughed. Crane had to cross the room, because refusing would have looked like fear, and fear was the one language council halls always understood. He picked up the pendant. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the silver darkened, not dramatically, not like fire or storm, but like ink spreading through water. A thin black line appeared across the crescent crown, and revealed tiny engraved words that had been hidden under tarnish. By order of Steward Silas Crane, second daughter removed. First blood record sealed, succession memory altered. Crane set it down too quickly. A forged inscription. Maribel's voice came from the arch, old but clear. No. Queen Ilara had it made before she died. Every head turned. The old archivist walked forward slowly, leaning on her cane, her white hair pinned at the nape of her neck. "I wrote the duplicate records. I hid the letters. And I placed the child where the court would never look for royal blood." Her eyes found Nora, and grief moved across her face with such tenderness that Nora nearly looked away. Among people trained to ignore her, the room seemed to tilt, but Nora stayed standing. Rowan picked up the pendant and brought it back to her. "Nora," he said, using her name as if it belonged in the hall as much as any crown or title. "Will you open it?" Her fingers closed around the silver. The pendant warmed instantly, and light spread across her palm, soft as moonrise. Behind the throne, beneath 3 hanging banners, the carved Ashford sigil began to glow. Not the single-crowned wolf everyone knew, but 2 marks side by side, the crown line and the crescent line, separated for 20 years, and now shining together. Gasps moved through the room, but Nora heard only her own breath and Rowan's voice beside her. "The bloodline was never weak," he said. "It was divided." Crane took 1 step back. Vanessa Cross lowered her eyes, not in shame exactly, but in recognition that the stage she had been placed upon had been built over someone else's erased name. Nora looked at the glowing sigil, then at the servants along the wall, at the maids who had known her as Silence, at the council that had known her as Nothing, and finally at Rowan, who had not taken the pendant from her hand. Her voice was still quiet when she spoke, but this time the entire hall leaned in to hear it. "My name is Nora Bennett," she said. "And I want the missing page restored." For a moment, no one answered Nora. The Great Hall had been built for declarations, verdicts, marriage vows, and the kind of applause that followed decisions made long before ordinary people were invited to witness them. It had not been built for a servant girl, asking calmly for history to be repaired. Yet the request remained in the air, simple and impossible to move around. Rowan looked at the council table. "The missing page will be restored today," he said. "Not copied. Not summarized. Restored." The eldest councilman lowered his eyes first, and the others followed in uneven seconds, like stones giving way under thawing snow. Steward Crane tried to speak, but Mara Bell lifted one trembling hand and placed a bundle of papers on the table. "I kept the original," she said. "Queen Ilara made me promise that if the child ever opened the pendant, the court would hear her name from the first record, not from a council correction." Her gaze moved to Nora, soft with grief and apology. "Your mother was not your first mother, child, but she was the one who saved you every day after." Nora felt the words settle carefully inside her. They did not erase the woman who had kissed the small moon beneath her eye, tied herbs in the kitchen window, and taught her that quiet things could still grow. They made room for another truth beside it. That was all Nora could bear, and somehow it was enough. Vanessa Cross stepped down from the platform, her silver gown whispering over the stone. For one breath, Nora expected pride, denial, the practiced coldness of a woman raised to win rooms like this. Instead, Vanessa removed the ceremonial lunar pin from her shoulder and laid it beside the darkened pendant. "I was told the bloodline needed a clean alliance," she said, voice steady but stripped of performance. "No one told me it needed an erased girl to stay erased. It was not forgiveness. It was not friendship. It was something cleaner, a refusal to keep standing on a lie once she had seen its shape." Rowan ordered the archive sealed from council hands until Mara and Nora could review every record together. Crane was removed from office before noon, not dragged away in spectacle, not turned into a public lesson, but escorted from the hall with his keys surrendered one by one onto the table. The sound of each key landing was small, yet Nora heard it more clearly than the murmurs that followed. By evening, the missing page had been returned to the Royal Ledger. The name written there was not Nora Bennett, not exactly. It was Nora Ilara Bennett, guardian line of the first blood, placed under protection by Queen Ilara Ashford and witnessed by those who had failed her. Nora read it 3 times. The letters did not make her taller. They did not make her voice louder. They simply made the silence around her different. 2 days later, Rowan brought her back to the northern tower. The bucket was gone. The rags were gone. The door stood open, and clean air moved through windows unbarred for the first time in 20 years. Dust still waited in corners. Some rooms were still locked. Truth, Nora was beginning to understand, did not arrive all at once just because a pendant opened. Rowan placed the tower key in her palm. It was warm now, ordinary in its warmth, like something that belonged to a living house. "You may keep it closed," he said. "You may open it. You may have every stone taken down, if that is what gives you peace." Nora looked at the stair where she had climbed as punishment, the chamber where the drawer had answered, the archive where a queen had left proof for a girl she would never meet. Then she walked to the nearest window and pushed it wide. Cold spring air entered with the scent of pine and rain. Below, servants crossed the courtyard without hurrying away when they saw her. Mara stood near the herb garden, watching with both hands folded over her cane. Rowan remained behind Nora, not shielding her from the world, not claiming the view for her, only waiting beside her as if her choice deserved all the time it needed. Nora touched the pendant at her throat and listened for the wolf inside her. It did not roar. It did not need to. It was there, awake and steady, breathing with her. "Leave the windows open," she said. Her voice was still quiet, but the tower carried it, and this time the whole keep seemed to hear.